because that would help resolve the sort of still simmering Albanian question within Macedonia. A similar, although not as poignant, but a similar situation I think prevails in Montenegro. However, containing Russian reactions outside the Balkans I think will prove more problematic. I agree, again, that there won't be an immediate recognition of the breakaway territories in Georgia and Moldova, but I think Russian authorities have already indicated that they have other tools available to try and stick it in the eye of the United States. For example, a whole list. They could fortify economic and political ties with Iran, a closer relationship with China, developing this collective security treaty organization in Central Asia against NATO interests in Central Asia and the Caucasus. It could increase pressure on all the former Soviet satellites who seek inclusion in Western institutions, as well as those that are already in Western institutions, which we see regularly in the case of the Baltic states. The Putin leadership, I think, has deliberately created a sense of danger through this sort of anti-Western rhetoric, this sense that Russia is again surrounded by hostile countries, by an expanding NATO. Because for Russia, NATO in itself isn't a threat, but it's what comes with it. In other words, American influence, potential democratic countries where there's greater oversight over economic dealings, such as including the semi-transparent, often opaque Russian energy and other interests. So in all these areas, I think Russia would much prefer to roll back American influence, roll back NATO influence, and certainly not allow for new democracies to be formed anywhere along its peripheries. Russia much prefers divided countries, authoritarian countries, countries with simmering, unresolved political questions, and above all anti-American countries. Those they can deal with very nicely. It's afraid predictable autocrats are much better than unpredictable democrats. It's not that Russia wants to restore any kind of ideology, wants to restore any kind of empire in a traditional sense, but it wants to restore and build on its influences, its economic and other influences in these countries, to help to determine their foreign policies and really roll back the American superpower. And in this sense, and I'll finish on here, I think the Balkans have become useful for Moscow in trying to disrupt economic expansion in the wider European theater. Serbia, I think, is now a valuable bridgehead within Southeast Europe to further Russia's political and economic interests, particularly through the expansion of its energy networks and neutralizing non-Russian energy networks from Central Asia, which are really sort of semi-colonies of Russia, to Central Europe, to Western Europe. So in sum, I would say that with regard to a potential West-East crisis, it is time, I think, to stand up to Russia. And this, Kosovo, I think, presents a very important issue, a very important test, I would say, of European unity and transatlantic unity, transatlantic resolve. And I'd sum it up this way. Russia is not as strong as it thinks it is, or would like the West to think it is, but it is also not as weak and as incapable as, unfortunately, many in the West sometimes believe. I'll finish there.
Thank you, Janusz. Well, I for one, think that we could spend another half hour just going at each other up here, but we're going to resist that temptation because we have a highly informed audience, and I'd like to open it up for questions. I might just say that we have several students in the audience, and they're especially welcome, and I would hope that they would be asking questions. So we will recognize questioners. If you could stand and give us your name and any institutional affiliation. I know several of you, but not all of you. And if nobody wants to ask a question, we can continue the discussion. But, wow, okay. My old colleague from the Senate, Jim Jatras. There's somebody I know.
Jim Jatras, Director of the American Council for Kosovo. We represent the interest of the Serbian community in Kosovo under the leadership of their Bishop, Artemia, who, by the way, will be here next week, if any of you would like to see him.
Give him my best. I know him well.
For those of us who have been following this process for a very long time, it seems there's a relatively small group of people in Washington have been paying attention to Kosovo, and almost all of them are in favor of independence, and I think seriously considered no other option would be possible. And I think this is reflected in the attitude of our government, that the Albanians understood that there were no agreement that the Americans would support independence, that we told the Russians basically that if you're cooperative, you'll agree to our position on independence. If you're not, you don't, you're obstructionist. It seems we've now gotten to the point where some more people are paying attention to this. As Mr. Serwer pointed out, the op-ed in the paper this morning by Mr. Bolton, Mr. Eagleberger, and Mr. Rodman. I guess my question then is, as this a crisis approaches, or as Richard Holbrooke called it, a train wreck approaches, and more people are paying attention to it, do you see a growing sense of, well, maybe desperation is not the right word, of those who have been always committed to independence, that if they cannot force the issue over the next few weeks, that Mr. Gvozdev's recommendation and that of the op-ed this morning will in fact become the operative one, that the thing will settle into a kind of a cold standoff for the foreseeable future?
Who would like to?
Well, I, for one, if we could get a cold standoff, I'd be only too delighted. I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think peace and stability